o'clock. Pauls, he's absent. Palermo.
Here.
Festerson.
Here.
Gray.
Here.
Harding.
Here.
Melton. Mr. President.
Here. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for remarks by Councilmember Gray.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. A week from this coming Saturday at 9 o'clock in the morning at the courthouse steps here, there is going to be a program that will recognize the 100 years since the lynching of Will Brown and the attempted lynching of a mayor at that time and others. It will be an opportunity, first of all, to reflect on some of the problems and issues that hate creates. But it is also an opportunity to rededicate ourselves to working to make sure that everybody in our community receives what is rightfully ours in this democracy, and that no one gets left behind again. So it's an opportunity that I hope you all will take advantage of, to come down and listen to the story of what went down 100 years ago, but more importantly, rededicate ourselves to ending hate. Thank you.
An affidavit of publication is on file for the pre-council and city council meeting, and a current copy of the Open Meeting Act is posted in a white binder on the east wall of the legislative chambers.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this meeting of the Omaha City Council. We thank you for joining us today. As a courtesy to those in attendance and to facilitate the conduct of our business, would you please turn off or silence your phones at this time, Madam Clerk?
Item 6, a resolution to approve the 6121 Maple Tax Increment Financing Redevelopment Project Plan located at 6121 Maple Street in an amount up to $241,000.
The public hearing on item 6 begins at this time. Are there any proponents?
Yes, good afternoon. Don Seaton, Omaha City Planning. And this TIF project is located in downtown Benson, Maple Street and 62nd. Presently looks like this. It's a building that's been vacant for a couple years. It's in poor condition. It's going to be rehabbed as a public gathering space. The elevations, about 5,000 square feet. The project's about $1.69 million. They're asking for $241,000 in TIF support. This will really fill in a key gap in downtown Benson. Complies with our master plan. We ask for your approval.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents? Mr. Miller?
Thank you, Don. Michael Sands, 1700 Farnham Street, Suite 1500. Here on behalf of the applicant, who's standing right next to me, Ryan Miller of the Development Ownership Team. Just to reiterate what Don said, this $1.7 million project in that Benson Entertainment District. The current building is 5,000 square feet. As Don said, it has been vacant for at least a couple of years. The plan for the project is to rehabilitate that first floor area, to turn it into a 5,000 square foot event space, and then to build out the second floor into a space that will support both the event space, and then when the event space is not being utilized, it will act as a flex area that Ryan can speak to some of the concepts that they're planning for that area. Ryan and his ownership team does have extensive experience in the Benson area, and they have identified this as a need, as Don said, in that area. Just a couple of questions or really clarifications that I wanted to go over that have come up during the approval process that I think would be helpful to kind of go over outright. With respect to the second floor, shortly after we submitted the TIF application, initially the second floor was the concept for that was to be a standalone bar/restaurant space. Shortly after that occurred, Abraham Catering, who is the a catering slash kind of event management company, obviously well-established, well-known in Omaha. Made it known to my client that they would need to utilize that space, or that they wish to utilize that space for kind of flow-over events, or as you'll often see at weddings, kind of a cocktail area before you go down to where dinner's being served down below. So at that point, the use had to pivot a little bit. We did make that known to the planning department immediately. The planning department reiterated to us that we didn't have to pull the plan or make any sort of formal amendment to the plan because in their eyes the use didn't substantively change, at least as far as planning was concerned. Just real briefly, I know parking is a hot button issue in Benson. I just wanted to provide up front that my client has been working on that. It is a part of his business plan. Right now, they are negotiating with an existing entity in the immediate vicinity that would provide parking during event times. And because parking is so important to them, they actually have put a contingency plan in place where they do have an option for an existing vacant lot that they could build out in the event that the negotiations don't materialize. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions. Ryan's happy to answer any questions as well.
Thank you, Mr. Sands. Are there any other proponents wishing to be heard?
Ryan Miller, 6209 Maple Street. Any questions? I'll be happy to ask.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents? Are there any opponents?
Council President Jerem, members of the City Council, my name is Erin Feichtinger, 2719 North 49th Avenue, Mr. Festerson's district. I'm a resident of the Benson neighborhood, and I'm here in opposition of granting TIF to the project at 6121 Maple, specifically because of the financial justifications for TIF and because the project as it currently exists, based on what they've just said and at the planning board meetings, is not the same as the project described in the publicly available TIF application. First, as for the financial justifications for TIF outlined by the developer, I want to just point out that the 2018 current assessed tax value, as stated in the TIF application, was $372,000, and the developer bought the property for $650,000. Now, I get it. Benson is a hot neighborhood right now. I, too, overpaid for my property. What I didn't do is come back to the city and ask them to hold off on my taxes so I could redo my basement. Second, all of the public documents, including the resolution on which you are voting today, say that the second floor, which will need to be added, will be this bar and restaurant space. The June 7th memo from Mr. Seaton to the TIF committee, the June 26th memo from Mr. Fanslau to the planning board, all state that the second floor is designed to serve as a full-scale restaurant and bar space open to the public. The TIF application itself says the second floor will be a, quote, island-themed restaurant that opens out into a lush rooftop patio serving cocktails and unique glassware, and a menu built around the idea that everything tastes better when you're on vacation. That sounds super fun. My husband said he would definitely go there, except that the Benson vacation you were all planning no longer exists, and instead will be a flex space which is as well defined as it sounds. I'm fine with the cutting modern edge flex space in Benson, except that in the public documents which relate to, one, the need for TIF to construct the second floor addition, a necessity also iterated in the planning board meeting by the developer, and two, the financials related to the ability of the developer to replace the $241,000 in tax revenue associated with TIF all relate to the second floor space being that bar and restaurant space, that vacation. Under the market demand section in the TIF application, the applicant says that based on foot traffic from similar bars and restaurants in the area, they expect to serve approximately 39,748 customers per year and project that to be 60 to 80,000 over the following 2 to 4 years. That projection is related to the economic impact assessment required by TIF under the cost-benefit analysis, which states the project will generate additional sales tax and food and beverage tax on food and beverage services and hire approximately 17 employees. In the August 7th Planning Board meeting, the developer said they expect to host 85 events a year. in the event space with absolutely no estimates or data to support the impact or market demand of a second floor flex space, far short of the nearly 40,000 they would expect to serve. And as for the employees, if we're using a catering company, those employees aren't going to be hired. In the August 7th Planning Board meeting, in response to a question from Mr. Pate on the Planning Board, the attorney for the project says that he talked to the Planning Department, and he said it here again today. It was, quote, determined there was not a real need to change the application because it was known to the Planning Department. Now, I take umbrage with that assessment because, one, I did not elect the Planning Department or the Planning Board. I elected the senators who passed the Community Development Law, which mandates public transparency in the TIF process, and the City Council who protect that public interest. And two, if it is the case that a project which depends on the ability of the developer to replace 15 years of tax revenue for the public only needs to be transparent to the Planning Department and not with the public, then why do we have a public process for this at all? I ask that you deny the specific TIF request until an accurate TIF application is submitted for this project so that the public understands how TIF is really being used and for what, and so that you are not voting on resolutions that are only half accurate. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Are there any other opponents?
Good afternoon. My name is Mark Brannon, 6915 Evans Street, Omaha, Nebraska, 68104. I was going to mention much the same, talk about much of the same stuff that Aaron spoke on, but as she did such a good job of highlighting how this project does not match, the current project that they're going forward with does not match the existing application. It wouldn't be prudent for you guys to approve this. And so I would just second that, and then further one more concern about the parking. If, as designed, they're going to host events up to cocktail receptions for up to 300 people. That's several hundred cars coming to Benson for an event on the weekend. And as it is, as the project stands, there's no solution for where those people are going to park. Sure, because it's in a neighborhood business district, there's no mandate that they have parking considerations. They do rely on on-street parking, but knowing the situation in Benson, I don't think it would be wise to forward this without figuring out what that parking situation is.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Are there any other opponents? Seeing none, does the applicant wish 1 minute rebuttal?
Thank you, President. Michael Sands, 1700 Farnham Street, Suite 1500. I think the main point that I want to get across is that with respect to the flex space, at every point that we've had an opportunity to make it public knowledge about how that shifted, we obviously came to the planning board meeting and was very forthright to the planning board of just like I gave them the same explanation that I gave you, that had changed. There have been opportunities along the way, obviously, from the planning board and from the planning department to ask us to make any formal changes to the application. They did not do so, and I think probably the most important fact is that the application is not binding. It's an application. The redevelopment agreement will reflect what the project actually is. The redevelopment plan will reflect what the project actually is, and certainly, what we convey to the public at these hearings has conveyed what the project is and the direction of that project.
Thank you. Public hearing is closed. Councilmember Festerson.
Thanks, Mr. President. So this is in the Benson area and in my district, and I am supportive of what would be a $1.7 million reinvestment back into that district. And I know the applicant knows what he's doing. He started the Benson Brewery business that has been successful, and I think he is now sold, and actually that was just featured, I think, last night by the Commission and Visitors Bureau on Channel 7. And also, I think, is a lead investor in Barchin, which is a very successful entity in the neighborhood, too, and actually Omaha's, I think, most popular soccer bar now, which has been neat to see. So I know he knows what he's doing in terms of his investments and his business models. And this does appear to be what I would characterize as a second wave of investment in Benson that's coming as we speak. We had 2 new businesses just in the last week. We have one today that's right after this. This, of course, and then something that's coming to us shortly, about 97 new market rate apartments about 2 blocks from here. So a lot going on, and a lot of it's very positive. I did want to follow up on a few detailed questions, though, and a few operating questions that were raised to make sure we have those in order and have the answer to those. Don, if you would come back to the podium, please. Go ahead and say your name.
Don Seaton, City Planning.
So could you address the concern raised about the documents and the project evolving a little bit? And I think it was expressed that what does come back later is the redevelopment plan and agreement that does spell out those details in total, but could you address that for me?
A couple of things on that. One, well, regarding the parking, it is NBD zone, so there is no parking requirement. It complies with our parking, our zoning ordinance. Regarding the second floor use, whether it's a bar open to the public or a bar in support of the multi-purpose area, we don't see as a big difference from the zoning standpoint, nor from the TIF standpoint. We see them as essentially the same use. I think a comment was made on the necessity for TIF. The return on investment is 3.8% without TIF, 15 with TIF. So we felt the justification is in the report.
Okay. And a follow-up question on that, too. So obviously the TIF committee has recommended that for approval and has given this project the but-for test that's required under community development law.
That's correct. The TIF committee reviewed the finances for the project, looked at the cash flow and the return on investment.
And this would not happen without it?
Correct.
And then, can you describe the public improvements that come from that involvement?
Well, there's not an awful lot of opportunity for public improvements given the tightness of the site, but there will be some improvements to the adjacent sidewalk and the right-of-way, concrete, curb gutter type of stuff.
Okay.
Recently, Maple was just redone, much of it curb gutter in the public realm, so that further limited some of the opportunities. I would note also on the necessity for TIF, anytime you get into a tightly constrained site with an older building, you risk lead contamination problems, asbestos. Construction staging is more challenging because there's no room on the site. So there's additional arguments for the necessity of TIF.
Okay. And then can you describe the public process going forward in terms of hearings and additional input if this resolution is approved today?
Yes, after approval of this resolution, if that happens or occurs today, then we move on to a TIF agreement, and that's an ordinance. It'll be brought back before the city council. It will be laid over for public hearing or for public notification, and there'll be opportunity for more public input.
Okay. Thank you. And then Ryan, if you would, too.
Ryan Miller, 6209 Maple Street.
So we had a chance to talk about this a little bit, mostly over the phone, and just want to confirm a few things with you that I think you addressed up front. But the intention to have Abraham Catering there is not just an intention; it's a secured agreement or lease with them, right?
15-year. It's a 5-year option of lease and a 3 or 2 5-year followed-up options.
Okay, so they are the tenant.
Yep.
And then you have this flex space up above, which, you know, as you've acknowledged, is maybe something new to Omaha, but you're confident in that business model. You want to explain that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, so if we have the economics of the property secured with the primary use, the catering aspect of the property, then we could fill in the blanks. You know, so there's going to be several days where we have gaps in use, and then so we've been actively pursuing people to occupy the space, either for pay and then some donated space. So we reached out to Bryce Colton previously of No More Empty Pots and French Bulldog, and he's getting situated where he's at, but he wants to take the space, and we donated a portion of the space for him to teach kids in the Benson neighborhood how to, you know, go through. We're going to rent plots at Benson Community Garden for them, let them plant, go through the whole process, learn how the food industry works, how to cook, and kind of he's going to teach them how to kind of develop some hard skills. The Food Truck Association, there's members of that want to use the space to do their prep for their food trucks. We have several chefs that we've reached out to that expressed interest in using it as a kind of a test area for new concepts for their businesses. So, and then for us, we can, if we have meaningful gaps in use and off times, we can put pop-up bar, restaurant type of stuff in there for us to kind of further use the property. So there's been a lot of, and then we've also, Waddy White, he's a local artist, he's pretty prominent locally, and he's reached out to a few different groups for us, and he's actually going to give a tour this week to the American Arts Festival, which is kind of an art organization for refugees and immigrants to showcase their product, their art, and then with that, it just needs to be stuff we can take down and move around easily and quickly. So the space is going to be primarily an event space, and then we're going to try to do our best, if feasible, to kind of fill in all the blanks with other opportunities.
Okay. And I like the rendering I saw and what you intend to do there. It's an underutilized corner right now for sure, and that would open that up a lot.
Right.
You have met with the business owner next door. There would be some impact to his, his
Yeah,
line
I
of sight
talked
at least.
to Joe. I actually sold him the brewery, and I told him we're going to add a second story, block out the windows of the west facing. So we share a lot line with the building to the east, and that's a second story apartment, and there's a kitchen window and a living room window that we're going to block out with the second story, and he was favorable, and he wanted our contractors to have his number in case they needed him for anything. So.
Okay. And then I think the observation about parking is legitimate too. That's a bit of we're victims of our success in Benson a little bit in terms of sometimes the parking crunch there, but I think by and large it does work, but it's something we need to keep an eye on as things continue to emerge, like the projects I just described earlier. So I think you're wise to look for options, even though you're not required to do that under the zoning. Can you give me a confidence level on the two options you're pursuing?
We have an empty lot under contract where we could develop and turn into a parking lot. That's our nuclear option. It's the last thing we want to do. It's more expensive to carry. It's going to end up costing over $200,000+ by the time we're done with it. We don't really want to incur that cost, but we've reached out to several private parking lots nearby that we can rent on a per-use basis, and so far we're in agreement to use the parking lot. Now it's just finalizing the financial terms, and what they have is they have a parking lot in disrepair, so we maintain it. It's a not-for-profit. We maintain the parking lot for them, and then rent it on a per-use basis. So we'd actually end up, fixing their parking lot, and they'd probably generate between $15,000 and $20,000 a year in revenue, depending on the amount of events and how much is paid per use. So, they're happy about that. It's just going before the board, and it kind of takes time to kind of work that out.
Okay.
But and for us, we want parking, and we need it, because if we're trying to sell event space, you're competing with places that have parking, and that's going to be a big thing that comes up. So, I know we can't get all of the parking, but we can do something to alleviate some of the stress for both us and for the neighborhood.
So you're confident that's coming together?
Yeah, it seems to be progressing the way you want it to, but, don't spike the ball on the 1 yard line, right? So.
Okay. And so if all goes well, when would you hope to be open?
The contractors, it's taking a little bit longer than expected, and so they think we can have it open by spring, so.
Okay. And looks like closing at 11 p.m. for events and?
Abrams, it's either 11 or 12. I have to double check with them, but they shut it off at some point like that. And then, anything else that goes in there, I guess it'd be on a per situation basis.
Okay. Well, thanks for that explanation, and I do appreciate your ongoing investment in Benson.
Thanks.
10 years ago, we had a lot of vacancies and a lot of crime issues and a lot of concerns about the future of Benson, and I think due to a lot of entrepreneurs like yourself and due to city and private philanthropic investment in the physical structure of the neighborhood, it's well on its way, and I think its future is secure as long as projects like this keep coming forward.
Yeah, no, it's changed.
And I think they will.
Yep.
And I think, to my knowledge, to my recollection, I should say this is the only second project that's taken advantage of TIF in terms of reinvesting or making the business model work. We did make the district eligible for TIF, knowing these things could happen. So that's part, I think, why you're here today.
Right, and I'm hopeful more people take advantage of it. The neighbor needs it, so.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a motion to approve.
There were a couple other comments that the opponents made that I thought were legitimate concerns, and I just want to point out for the record that the valuation of the property for purposes of establishing a base value for TIF is not set by the city or anyone associated with the city. It's set by the Douglas County assessor through a process that the applicant has to go through to convince the assessor as to what the base value should be, and it's not until the assessor's office signs off on that that is then approved. In terms of our agenda, it is advertised in the supporting documents as a multi-use, or as referred to as a flex-use property. And the last thing I want to comment is I was pleased to hear your efforts that you're going to make to secure additional parking, but the zoning that's established there is neighborhood business district, and not unlike the downtown with the CBD, the NBD has very minimal parking requirements. So what the applicant is doing is out of volunteer efforts, but not required by the base zoning in effect for the property. There's a motion, a second, roll call.
Palermo.
Yes.
Festerson.
Yes.
Gray. Harding.
Yes.
Melton. Mr. President.
Yes.
Item 6 is approved, 6-0. Item 7, an application to consider a Class C liquor license for JoJo's Benson located at 6118 Military Street.
The public hearing on item 7 begins at this time. Are there any proponents?
Hello, my name is Jose Dionisio at 6109 Maple Street, and I'll be the owner of JoJo's. This will be my third restaurant in Benson. Right now we operate Ika Ramen, same in Benson, and just here applying for another license. So.
Okay, you're happy to answer any questions.
Yeah.
Are there any other proponents? Are there any opponents? Public hearing is closed. Councilmember Festerson.
Thanks, Mr. President. Jose, if you wouldn't mind coming back down just for a second, I wanted to give you a chance to talk about your new investment here, too. As you noted, you're a longtime investor in Benson also. Ika Ramen's one of my favorite places, and you got a downtown location now, too.
Yes.
We were just talking about that this morning, as a matter of fact, with the Convention and Visitors Bureau. I'll point out that you're one of the restaurants that's participating in Omaha Restaurant Week this week,
Yeah.
which we appreciate, and it features your restaurant, but also helps give proceeds to the food bank for the
Exactly.
Heartland. So thank you for doing that. And there's the commercial for Omaha Restaurant Week. In terms of what you're doing here, this is 61st and Military, right across the street from Jake's.
Exactly, yes.
And it's a renovation, and
Yes,
you
it's
want to talk about your business model a little bit?
Yeah, it's well, first of all, it is going to be an American restaurant. We are going to be serving dinner, lunch, and breakfast. Open 7 days a week. We're trying to get filling a little bit of a gap of what we understand as American food as what it is right now. So we want to give it a different take on American food, I guess I should say that. So yeah, we're very excited. You know, like the construction is ongoing as of right now, and we should be open by the end of October. So hopefully everything goes well.
Great. And how would you characterize this level of investment? Is there a dollar figure or number of jobs that come along with your business?
Yes, we are anticipating to have at least 20 employees, and just on the renovations, we are putting about $200,000 into that building, just to make our restaurant. So.
Great. Appreciate you doing that. I'm sure it will be successful. And I'll point out that although we do have a thriving entertainment district here, we also have a lot of other things going on with these apartments and architecture firms and banks expanding, and a lot of other entities as well to have a good mix here. But these are some of the most exciting things to come along, as just like we did last week, and look forward to seeing that be open.
Yeah, I saw that. So yeah, we're very excited to be in Benson. You know, like I said, this is my third business in Benson, and we're all up for it. You know, we see the growth, we see the development, a lot of people putting a lot of money into the neighborhoods, and we're there to support it as
Great.
well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Motion approved.
Roll call.
Palermo.
Yes.
Festerson.
Yes.
Gray. Harding. Melton. Mr. President.
Yes.
Item 7 is approved, 6-0. Consent agenda. Any member of the City Council may cause any item placed on the consent agenda to be removed. Items removed from the consent agenda shall be taken up by the City Council immediately following the consent agenda in the order in which they were removed, unless otherwise provided by the City Council Rules of Order.
The public hearings on agenda items 8 through 11 were held on September 10, 2019. Roll call.
Palermo.
Yes.
Festerson.
Yes.
Gray. Harding. Melton. Mr. President.
Yes.
Motion passed 6-0.
The public hearings on agenda items 12 through 24 and 26 through 31 begin at this time. If you wish to address the City Council regarding these items, please come to the microphone, indicate the agenda item number you wish to address, identify yourself by your name, address, who you represent, and if you are a proponent and opponent. Once we conclude the public hearings and vote on these items, we will proceed to public hearing on item 25. Are there anybody wishing to testify on the consent agenda resolutions other than item 25? Public hearing is closed. Roll call.
Palermo. Yes. Festerson.
Yes.
Gray. Harding. Melton. Mr. President.
Yes.
Motion passed 6-0. Item 25, a resolution to approve amendment number 1 to the agreement with First Star Fiber, Inc. for the provision of processing services of recyclable material collected from the City of Omaha residents.
Before we begin the public hearing on item 25, we have Mr. Indabash from the Law Department, Mr. Key from Public Works, and Mr. Googles from First Star Fiber.
Thank you. Bernard Indabash, Deputy City Attorney. Just by way of background and also to address the question raised this morning at pre-council. First Star Fiber was awarded a recycling contract for a 10-year term back in, started in January of 2016. And at that point in time, the contract as written is they pay us for the recyclables that they use. At that point in time, there was no other bidder. They did contact us last year, and through the course of this year, there was a lot of discussion about the price of recyclables being depressed. They were losing significantly on the contract with the city. They opened up their books for the Public Works Department and the Finance Department to look at it, and basically informed us that based on the economic conditions, that they were going to be forced to forfeit their performance bond and discontinue doing the recycling work for the city just because of the financial circumstances. That, of course, put Public Works in a position where there would be no ability to do recycling, and that was a condition that it was decided it was important to attempt to avoid. So obviously we attempted to look for a solution. This is a solution before you, and that solution was, and this what this amendment does is an agreement to end the contract early, subject to paying them not what they've sought, quite frankly, but what it would cost us to take the recyclables to the dump. And they would still have to perform that duty meanwhile, while we went out and rebid the process. Quite clearly, obviously, they bid the right to do this. We don't think there's any question about the authority for us to negotiate this type of a resolution. Obviously, the alternative, and I'll say we can call their bluff and see if they'll actually go through with what it was. That was not an alternative that the Public Works Department wanted to explore or to lead. So this is the best solution that we could come up with, and it's brought before you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Jim Key, Omaha Public Works Department. Bernard covered a lot of what the background was for this particular agenda item. Council had asked in pre-council what the financial impact or how many tons would be brought to the facility for this remaining 4 months. We're averaging about 1,300 pounds or 1,300 tons a month, and so the financial impact at a $25.92 per ton is roughly $135,000. We believe that in our solid waste budget, we could easily absorb that cost, so there shouldn't be any overage by the end of the year. We will be bidding out recycle processing. It actually advertises beginning tomorrow. By the end of October, we should have those bids in and potentially a recommendation before the mayor to forward to you.
Thank you. Mr. Googles, did you wish to be heard at this time?
Dale Goebbels, 1211 Court Drive, Papillion. First, I want to thank the council for the opportunity to come and express our appreciation for the many years of service that we've had in partnership to provide recycling for the city. And quite honestly, I'd rather not be here today because of the current market conditions that have brought this on. The reasons for the decline are many. I could spend a lot of time here explaining those to you, but I could just boil it down to a simple fact. It really comes down to supply and demand. And when China decided that they were no longer going to accept what Americans considered to be recyclables, when in fact they weren't always truly what they were proposed to be, they shut the world off, not just America, but Europe, from exporting their recyclables into China. It is coming back. We've actually started to move some of the material again just in the last few weeks. But if you've had the opportunity to drive past our processing center, you can see that we're still way below what we normally have shipped out of here. And the level of demand right now is still low. The earliest that we think we're going to be able to move all the cardboard that's sitting out alongside of our building is maybe by January. We're hoping to have it out before the snow flies. But it isn't moving out at any price that we can actually tolerate. Back just a few years ago, cardboard was selling for anywhere from $150 to $200 a ton. This past several months, we're lucky if we find anyone who's willing to pay $30 a ton for it. So that is why we start meeting with the city to describe our situation, and as was expressed here, we're willing to be very transparent about what we're doing. We've been processing, as I said, the city's materials since 2006. We're proud of the fact that we do that, but we came to the realization some time ago that we can no longer simply process the city of Omaha's material and actually subsidize it, which is what it's come to. So with that, I'd ask for your support for this amendment. Gives me actually another opportunity, and as was also expressed, we did agree that we will bid on the new contract that comes out. We're willing to go up against whoever wants to take this on, but we have to do it in a way that I can justify it to my banker and to my family and to my employees that we're doing it because it makes economic sense for us. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents on item 25?
Thank you.
Are there any opponents? Public hearing is closed. Councilmember Festerson.
Thanks, Mr. President. I want to start by saying every major city should have an effective recycling program, and that's what we're talking about here today in terms of preserving our ability to do that. So I appreciate the topic we're addressing here today and the method by which we're going about it. I did have a few follow-up questions regarding this, and then I think it is important also to talk a little bit more about the bid that's about to go out because they're related to preserving our ability to recycle and to be an effective community and a responsible community in that respect. And I think we all felt it was important to talk about that a little bit here today rather than have that just be on consent agenda this morning. So I'm not sure if this is best addressed by Mr. Indenbosch or maybe Mr. Key. Bernard, do you want to take a shot at it?
Certainly, I'm not going to get into the bids.
Bernard
Indenbosch, Deputy City Attorney.
Thank you. So what we have here today is a resolution, as described, that would go through the end of the year.
Correct.
That would, in effect, maintain our current arrangement with our recycling processor that otherwise could not be maintained financially.
Correct.
And As you indicated, how did you come to the $25.92 per ton reimbursement? That's the rate we would otherwise be paying them just to dispose of it, right?
If we didn't have them and we had to pay somebody to dispose of it, that's what we would have to pay to dispose of it.
And I agree that's not a good option, to just take this to the landfill, so I understand and recognize the rationale by which you came up with that figure. Mr. Goebbels started to address this. I think it's important to also describe how this could then relate to the RFP that's going out. And that is that First Star Fiber has agreed by function of this resolution that they will bid on that. If they are the successful bidder, that arrangement will probably overtake this agreement, January 2020 presumably. If they are unsuccessful or are not the lowest and best bidder, they have agreed to continue to provide this service under a reasonable rate until such time the new bidder could take on the work. Is that accurate?
Correct, and of course, that rate is subject to negotiation, which is, of course, a situation you'd rather not be in, but that's, the reality is we can't predict where things are going to be in 4 months. But yes, they have agreed to continue based on us being able to reach a reasonable negotiated rate between the two of us.
Okay.
And that would have to come back to council, I believe.
Okay, as a similar resolution?
Yes.
And that agreement could be as long as through all of 2020?
Correct.
Okay.
Because I mean, the plan is, I think in the RFP, and Mr. Key certainly can address it, but whoever would get the contract would certainly be in place by the beginning of 2021.
Okay. So that's important to note from my perspective, because that rationale or that method of what we're doing here ensures we'll have a recycling processor during this time or possible transition and won't be left without such the ability to do that or stuck taking these kind of materials to the landfill, right?
That's certainly the intention.
I think that's important. And then, I'm not sure how much you can or want to address the bid, but one thing that we talked about in Public Works Committee about it is the way that's structured. It allows bidders to bid on processing and drop-off sites for glass and such, but you don't have to bid on both. Is that correct?
That is correct, though I am going to, if it's all right, I'll have Mr. Key step up. He's certainly more familiar with the specifics of the bid.
Sure. Jim, if you would.
Jim Key, Public Works Department. The bid will be structured that if someone chooses to bid solely on drop-off sites, they may, but we would require, as it's currently drafted, bidders who are interested in processing to also bid on the drop-off site. So there's nothing precluding someone that just is in the hauling business, for instance, that has containers, if they want to host a drop-off site and they can give us a reasonable rate at that, and we could put them under contract for the drop-off sites. But certainly anyone that bids on the processing portion, where they're going to receive the recyclable materials and use those resources to generate revenue, they would also then need to bid on the drop-off sites.
And I like that methodology because that, I think, could encourage some flexibility or maybe some innovation in how we do these things, and hopefully lower bids, of course. But the one concern I would have is, or I guess my question to you is, do you have the concern that no one might bid on drop-off sites? Because I wouldn't want to see drop-off sites go away.
And that's one of the reasons that we coupled it with the processing contract. The recycling materials are viewed as a resource, and they do have value. And so if someone's going to receive those materials from the city, the hosting the drop-off sites or putting together those drop-off sites is one of the costs of doing business, is that they'll need to factor into their bid.
Okay, so they are required to
Yes.
provide that service. All right. And how many locations?
It's a minimum of 5 locations. One location will need to be west of 168th Street, and then the remaining 4 locations will be quadranted throughout the city with a certain linear mile or radial mile from each other, trying to get into the basically northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest portions of the city.
Same number as now?
Same numbers now, but there's incentives. There's incentives in the current contract that if they were to start another site, they get a certain percentage over what they bid for hosting, say, a 6th site. They could do that now. That same provision is in the contract that we'll be letting.
2 more questions, then I'll let others have a chance here. First one is, there is a drop-off site in Benson at 75th and Corby, which is problematic. Unfortunately, it's been a site of a lot of illegal dumping, chairs and sofas and things like that, that, you know, one would hope the public has more responsibility than to do that, but it is happening. So I would pitch to you and maybe Mr. Gubbles if we could give some special attention to that site to clean that up or do what we can to make sure that people are only taking recyclable materials there. That would be helpful.
And we try to coordinate with the police. If someone recognizes or indicates a vehicle has dumped something illegally and they report it to us, we work with the police department to try to find those individuals and let them handle that accordingly. But there's definitely provisions in the contract now to maintain those sites in a manner in which they don't become a nuisance.
Yeah, some enforcement would be welcome from my perspective. And I think the otherwise are quite full with recycling materials, so I think people are using them. And then lastly, is there any outstanding balance from First Star Fiber to the city at this point in terms of previous contracts or the current contract that is unpaid?
No, under the previous contract, the floor value that was set, we've never exceeded, or the commodity has never exceeded that value. So basically, First Star has been receiving all of our materials at no cost. And in turn, since the value of those haven't exceeded the floor, there's been no revenue share for those recyclables.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I'll be supportive of this. I think it's important we do continue recycling in the city. It's a bit unfortunate that we're in this position, but it's one we're dealt with and one that we need to handle. And I think it's the responsible thing to do to continue an effective program. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Harding.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to ask a lot of probably similar questions, but maybe in different ways. But I'd like to start out with, as long as you're there, Jim, if you could confirm, you said it was about 1,300 tons per month?
Correct.
And then with the rate, then that's about $135,000 per month, right?
No, that would be for the remainder of this year.
So for the 4 months, the
For the 4
remaining
months.
4 months. Okay, that's why I wanted to make sure I was clear on that. So then on an annualized basis, I'm going to cheat because I'm not good at math. So on an annualized basis, that's a little more than, around $550,000, I think.
If we were to go forward
If
under
it's
this current
135 for a quarter, then four
Right,
times that, so.
It's 4 months.
It's only for 4 months, and then
Well, what I'm trying to say is, because in this agreement, if there is going forward to assume that it might be a similar amount, I'm just trying to think of budgeting for what it's going to cost us maybe in 2020 that maybe we haven't budgeted for, that at that same rate, if an agreement is not reached, or if a new contractor isn't agreed to by January 1st of 2020, as I understand this agreement, that First Star would continue at that same rate. Am I reading the agreement right?
my understanding and the way that what's before you today is if they aren't awarded the contract beginning in 2020, a different rate would need to be negotiated for them to continue to be the processor.
Yep. A rate would need to be negotiated. It could be the same, it could be something different. And if you're right, if the same rate was negotiated, since this was for 4 months, it'd be multiplied times 3, 135,000 times 3 is about 405,000.
Okay, hold on, let me read this real quick for some reason. Okay. All right, well, thank you for that clarification. But again, so on an annualized basis of something we haven't budgeted for, that's what the number would be. So if, and I don't know if we want to talk too much about the bid at this point if it's not out on the street, but is it anticipated that the bid for the next recycling hauler would be coterminous with the just recently approved solid waste hauling contract?
The base contract would have a different term, but the overall contract with extensions would basically mirror what has just been awarded. So the way it's currently drafted to be a 5-year base contract with 3 5-year extensions, so it'd be a total of 20 years potentially.
But if, again, if I'm reading this correctly, that would this new agreement not start until January 1st of 2021 or January 1st of 2020?
It has the potential to start early on January 1st, 2020, depending on who is awarded the bid.
So then it would not be coterminous if you're
Correct.
using those terms. Do you think that makes sense, to have maybe these contracts not be coterminous?
Well, and one of the reasons we're having to rebid this particular contract is because of the way the market has fluctuated. It can be unpredictable. Within 5 years, market could have turned around. We might be able to get a better deal, so to speak, on a contract. So we may want to rebid it by the end of the initial 5-year term. I agree with you that having them sync up makes sense in terms of our administrative work that we have to do. But we were kind of put in or the city's put in a position of, having recycling continue to be part of our program and what we want to do. So in order to make that happen, we had to kind of bid this a little bit earlier than we would have anticipated.
Okay, well, maybe it's probably too late if the bids are on the street, but it might have been helpful to have that first term be for up to 6 years, so that at least that first when that first one rolls off, then it could be on a 5-year renewal, which would then put it in sync with the other contracts, but.
Certainly.
Sounds like that ship has sailed. The other thing I just wanted to state is I know there was some concern voiced earlier when we were going through the solid waste considerations that the city wasn't committed to recycling, and I think this certainly sends that message that the city certainly is committed to recycling, because we're offering to pay up what we could have now been putting on our curb rather than a separate recycling. And so I appreciate the efforts that the city and the administration's made in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harding. I have a few things to say or add to this conversation. The first is that I'm seeing a trend now with the city that I expressed my concern about at the time we had the last request to let a contractor out of a bid, and that was Deffenbaugh, when they wanted to assess the city a fuel service charge. Market conditions had changed. Fuel costs had gone up. City, pay us more money. We bid this amount. We bid that amount knowing the time and length of the contract. We knew at the time markets changed. I mean, who knew there would be an attack on the Saudi Arabian oil producing plant recently? There could be even more things in store. Market conditions change all the time. And when you have the sanctity of the bid process and now a slippery slope that's become really slippery in terms of letting contractors out of their bids, what do I say to the taxpayers who now are paying this roughly $500,000 to subsidize this contractor who is in the position that they are, rather than having the bond holder pay the cost? Mr. Indenbosch.
And obviously, I'm sympathetic to what you're talking about, and obviously, one of the things that we were approached about doing was to totally change the pricing model. We didn't feel in the law department that that was appropriate. The reality was, and the dilemma that we faced was, the cost of getting out of this contract that was entered into 5 years ago was roughly $65,000 for them. That's what the performance bond was. And the reality was, based on the research that the Public Works Department and the Finance Department did and the discussion with First Star over the past 12 to 15 months, that was a very real likelihood. And so I guess to some extent, the dilemma that you're in is if recycling is something that's important, and I think everybody believes that it is, Are you held over a barrel a little bit? I suppose you are. This was, we felt, the best alternative to try to make sure that we continued with recycling. Believe me, the number that we're talking about in this amendment is substantially less than any number that First Star ever suggested to us. But again, I appreciate your point you're making, because I've been with the city a long time. I understand it, and I'm sympathetic, quite frankly, to the position and argument. I think the reality to the consumer is the way the contract was written, the option to get out was relatively cheap, and the value on recycling was enough that we had to come up with an alternative to keep recycling as an option.
So in terms of moving forward, having been told previously what an exceptional circumstance the situation was the last time, we now have, within just a couple years, another exceptional case. And what assurances do we have that the next contractor who runs into financial woes during the performance of their contract then isn't let out of it, or doesn't ask to be let out of it because of precedent? So you might argue, well, hey, one time is an exception, but now you've done this twice, and what if the next one comes around? Do we have to let them out of it? Do we have legal risks now, if challenged in court, with regard to the city's demonstrated willingness to let companies out of contracts, that if we don't let the next one out, that a court or jury will say, you let those two out, city, you should let this one out?
I don't believe this is a situation that establishes precedents. Certainly it helps somebody come in and make that argument because they can look at prior things. But every case is based on its individual facts. And the practical matter is, whenever you do something that's outside of the norm, you have to articulate why you're doing it. And if you have a good faith and a reasonable basis to do it, then you can legally support why that particular exception is different than others. And if you can't articulate that, then obviously it makes it more difficult. In this circumstance, we believe we have an ability to articulate a reasonable basis for the act, but you're absolutely right. That there is that potential risk. I know one of the things that they did in drafting the new bid documents was to do a better job of trying to address the booms and the busts in the market. That the last set of bid specs addressed the booms, but really didn't address what would happen when the market was in bad shape for a period of time. Hopefully, that's addressed in a way that we won't be in the same situation.
Now, what do you say to those who look at this proposed agreement and say, I don't find anything that requires the contractor to take materials that it decide that it has no market for, or the market pays so little for, it isn't worth it, so we're just going to ship this stuff to the Butler County landfill where no one's really going to see us do it? What assurances that this public clamor and expression of community will for recycling, and by the way, there's no bigger advocate for recycling, I think, on the council than me. I run my own office recycling, carry this stuff home with me. So what about that question? Well, First Star has some materials. They're not going to get paid. It's these little skinny plastic water bottles. Some people find them in the Pacific Ocean in the big garbage patch. How do we have assurances those things aren't going to end up in a landfill?
Well, I mean, obviously we have
There isn't any assurance. is
There isn't any assurance other than the inspections done by the Public Works Department to ensure that people are following the terms of the contract.
But under the contract, and this amendment would pay this price, but there is no guarantee the material will in fact be recycled.
The contract we're assured the exact same thing about what happened with the materials now for the next 4 months as we have been for the past 4 years. It doesn't alter their obligation to recycle or our obligation to be able to inspect it. All it does is alters the financial arrangement.
So since there's no requirement in the existing contract, there's no assurance today, so if we amend this and now pay them 20-some bucks a ton, there's still no assurance.
And I
Is
don't
that
know,
what you're saying?
and I don't know the existing contract well enough to know what assurance exists. Jim probably,
Mr. Key?
certainly does.
Under the existing contract, and we've had this for previous contracts as well, if we make the request to review their financial documents, we have that right to go there and review everything. Now, if they decide to do some funny accounting, I don't know that we would necessarily pick up on that, but we have our finance department also available to us to review their full financial statement.
I don't know if the question was well phrased. The question was, let's just say hypothetically, we've got this pile of materials that's been dropped off by Waste Management in the next 4 months, and it's of all the materials dropped off, there's this one group that there's no market for. And Mr. Goebbels has been bailing it and storing it, and God bless him, he's a great guy, and he's got a big heart, and he's committed, and his employees are committed, and that's wonderful. But if we're going to pay to collect, and we're amending the contract, is this an opportunity to get assurances, or are you telling me, Mr. Indenbosch, that since there aren't any requirements now, even though we're amending the contract and we're going to pay $20-some a ton, we can't impose any, regardless of how much Mr. Goebbels is committed and wants to do this and is going to try to find a market for him. If he can't, he can just have a truck come and take them away.
So under the current contract, there are penalties or liquidated damages that can be assessed if it is found that the recycling processor is taking things to a landfill and not putting them towards a recycled end-use market. Certainly there's always residual material, stuff that's contaminated that cannot be recycled. But if the material has a value, there are liquidated damages that can be assessed per instance that they are found to be sending those materials to a landfill or a place that's not recycling them.
And in terms of the liquidated damages, let's just say he comes in and he convinces you again, like he did here, hey, there's no market for this stuff. If we don't get paid, can't take it. Well, now we're paying. He's committed. I believe him. He's nodding his head. He's going to store this stuff and try to get a place to sell it if he can. But if he convinces you or us, or it's the administration in terms of whether liquidated damages are assessed, there just isn't a market for this stuff. I mean, the plastic bottles are so thin now that you got to have 10 times more than you used to have. It's just easier to grind them up and take them away. That's the way it is what you're telling me.
Well, you're absolutely right that that's
Okay.
not part of this particular amendment. It was not something we sought to get. The provisions that are in the current contract, as far as that, will continue to apply under this amendment. But you're absolutely right that if those circumstances occur, that's what the contract does not change that particular provision.
Thank you. Mr. Goebbels, come on up. A fellow Greek Islands diner as you and I are, and you deserve the opportunity to be heard.
Dale Goebbels, 1211 Cork Drive, Papillion. I appreciate your concern from a legal point of view. As Jim pointed out, we are obligated, and there is penalties if we fail to recycle the material that we've taken that isn't contaminated. From a practical point of view, it makes more sense for us to hold material and give it away to a recycler, which many of our colleagues have done across the country, which also depresses prices even further. But it's a practical matter because even though it costs the city $25.92 to use the landfill, our cost, because we're considered a private contributor to the Douglas County, which we're obligated to use for any of the residual, we pay the higher fee of about $35, $36 a ton, which has been going up every year anyway. So the $26 from the city doesn't justify us to even look for a landfill alternative if we can find a place that will take it for free. So and that's what we'll do.
Thank you, Mr. Googles. Anything else that you want to respond to?
I think it behooves the city to realize that commodity markets should never have been used as the sole reason to justify recycling. We employ 120 people. Many of those people probably wouldn't have jobs, quite honestly, if they weren't our employees. And they're good people, don't get me wrong. But this is not high-skilled labor that we try to do. It's a service that we are providing the city. And over the last 12 years or so, we have kept out of the landfill on an annual basis about $400,000, as is apparent with this amendment. When commodity prices were good, and even though, frankly, we should have been putting that money back into our operation, we paid the city over $6 million over the first 10 years of our contract. A lot of communities across the country have recognized the value of recycling to the level that it is a service and a joint shared value of the city and the processor to share in the risk and the rewards. That's something that we're willing to do and have been for some time, but the current contract doesn't allow that. Hopefully, the new bid will give us that opportunity. And as a result, the city of Omaha will have a much better recycling program, whether we win the bid or others. It's simply because when you give people the convenience of putting everything that they think is recyclable, and I do mean they think is recyclable, that isn't always the case, that has to be separated back into a commodity. Starting two and a half years ago, knowing that the city contract, when it goes to carts, if it's like Bellevue or other parts of the country, where the level of tonnage is doubled in the first month, because when people are given the convenience of a cart that's larger, that can hold all their recyclables, it doubles the amount of recycling. Knowing that, we started making investments in our facility because we thought at the time our contract, existing contract, would have had a 5-year renewal anyway, and we wouldn't be ready to handle that level of additional materials. As it is, we're going to have to invest if we do win the contract. We just got some of the initial quotes in within the last 2 weeks. We're going to have to, in addition to the $3 million that we've spent already to try to get ready for the city in that opportunity, we'll have to put in at least another $2 million in. And, when I hear that the bid is going to be for a 5-year with 5-year extensions, I just want to point out that it's very difficult for anyone these days to get financing for such a capital-intensive industry that has fluctuations in markets that go way beyond anything that a local company can do. When you have international markets, international intrigue that affects what these commodities are valued at, I'm going to have a hard time even convincing my banker that $26 a ton is sufficient to justify these additional investments. And I just want, that to be out there, because I don't want to be standing here in 4 months, whether we win the bid or not, suggesting to you that you should keep recycling going, even though the winning bidder is probably going to have to come in at a lot higher value.
Yeah, I don't question that aspect to this, the city's efforts to divert from the landfill, to keep trash out of our waterways and our green environment. The state of affairs throughout the world in those areas right now is very alarming.
Yeah.
And it's embedded in the master plan of our city's environmental element that these are the goals we should be pursuing. My heartburn over this issue is we have a contract that was bid. You happen to be the only bidder. And I want the public to be aware, A, we're waiving the sanctity of the contract. We're waiving the sanctity of the bidding process. And we're doing that now for the second time in just a few short years. And the concern that causes me going forward with other contractors, because it opens or makes the bidding process extremely vulnerable to manipulation in terms of lowering the bid below that which you might otherwise do, with the hopes of securing a long-term contract with the city, thinking if you get into trouble, they'll let you out. What kind of signal does that say for a city that has literally at least $1 billion more in sewer work to be done, possibly hundreds of millions in road work bonds if the mayor's plan gets approved by the voters for fixing our streets, and a whole host of other items that are yet to come. Now, does the fact that the goal of keeping stuff out of the landfill and out of our waterways and preventing pollution and litter so that we can recycle and reuse and try to save the planet trump?
Well, this is the only planet that I know of, so
Right.
I guess I know.
So
where
I
I'd
think
come
that's
down.
what I'm hearing. I think what I'm hearing from you and Mr. Key and Mr. Harding and Mr. Festerson, that these goals are so important to the city, and your situation's so troubling that if we don't, then we're just going to divert out to the Pheasant Point landfill.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what makes this thing different than the other situations. But I think to be consistent with protecting the bid process, as I was with the fuel surcharge request for Deffenbaugh, no matter how big of a staunch proponent I am for recycling, I think it's important that I be consistent there. I have no problem, by the way, with letting you out of the contract. I've let, when I was on the Public Works Committee, that's what my position was. So if you wanted out and wanted to rebid it early, that to me would be okay. Mindful it's going to cost more. Mindful that these things need to be budgeted for. Mr. Key? You made a comment that caught my attention. The comment was, there's plenty of money in the solid waste whatever account to bear the cost that this is anticipated to be assessed to the city. Why do we have this excess money, and why is the account flush? Is it the liquid damages that Waste Management's been paying in that have been funding these extra funds, or where's this money coming from?
Jim Key, Public Works. One of the things that we budgeted for 2019 was additional professional services to help us with the transition from one contractor to another. So we had set aside money in anticipation of letting a contract to a consultant or some outside firm to assist in that transition. We've instead been doing that internally, so that money that would have normally gone to that is not going to be going towards that particular cost. Instead, it's something that we can use to basically help with this cost that's being incurred. And certainly the other point that you've spoken to is the liquidated damage that have been assessed. That's basically a deduction that's taken off of the payment to Waste Management. And so those two things are helping to offset the cost that's incurred for these, this final leg of this year.
Okay. Now, a comment that Mr. Goebbels made that caught my attention that I thought would be more appropriate to him, because he hasn't and shouldn't see the bid, and I don't want to get too far in the weeds on something that's maybe not on the streets, but I think I heard Mr. Goebbels say, and you can nod, Mr. Goebbels, if I summarize it incorrectly. If I incorrectly summarize what I thought you said, you can come up and correct me. He said that he thought what proved to be a big miscalculation, or worse to that effect, was making our recycling contract a commodities-based pricing formula, making what we were going to pay him or he pay us based off what he could sell the materials for. Now, Mr. Goebbels, was that accurate? So is the new bid that's on the street far enough along for you to be able to say, are we continuing with that same model, and if so, why? If that model got us into this situation, mindful that the definition of insanity is keep making the same mistakes and expecting different results, what is the model?
It is a different model than what we bid it 5 years ago. So 5 years ago, we asked bidders to put in a floor based upon 2 different commodities, and then if the prices of those commodities ever were above what was advertised in a national publication, then there would be a revenue share based upon the tonnages that are coming into the facility. The manner in which First Star Fiber set their floor, we've never gone above that. The commodity values have never gone above that as published. So there's never been any revenue sharing. But on the flip side of that, if you're basing that as your operational cost, what that floor is, if you never meet that price, that means you're incurring expense and you're not making your, so that's why he's in the situation I believe that he's in. So the new bid is not structured that way where we set a floor. It's structured differently to account for, as Mr. Endenbosch said, the booms and the busts.
Okay, thank you. Is there a motion, a second?
We need a motion and a second.
Roll call.
Palermo. Yes. Festerson. Yes. Gray. Harding. Yes. Melton. Yes. Mr. President.
No.
Item 25 is approved, 5-1. Item 32, an ordinance to approve a 5-year agreement with the Omaha Public Library to forgive patron fines in exchange of non-expired canned goods and other non-perishable foods.
The public hearing on item 32 begins at this time. Are there any proponents? Are there any opponents? Public hearing is closed.
Item 33, an ordinance to transfer $2,425,480 in the 2019 budget from the wage adjustment account to the city departments.
The public hearing on item 33 begins at this time. Are there any proponents? Are there any opponents? Public hearing is closed. Mr. Festerson.
Thanks, Mr. President. Just for Mr. Curtis's benefit, on items number 33, 34, and 35, this morning we talked about this a little bit and just requested of Andrew that we have the balances in these accounts. these are something we've had to do for a long period of time in terms of budgeting wage adjustment accounts when there were no set agreements with our bargaining units. But now there mostly are, with the exception of one, I believe. So our question this morning was just wanting to see, do these transfers then zero out these funds in 2019? And if not, what is that balance and where does that balance go? And then I believe in 2020, the only wage adjustment account would apply to Local 385 that does not currently have an agreement. But those are answers I think Andrew's going to get for us. So I just wanted to point those out again this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Next item.
One public hearing will be held for items 34 and 35, ordinances to transfer funds in the 2020 budget from the wage adjustment account to city departments.
The public hearing on items 34 and 35 begin at this time. Are there any proponents? Are there any opponents? Public hearing is closed.
Item 36, an ordinance to amend Omaha Municipal Code, Section 6-150, to provide that it is unlawful for any person to bring any animal into the city which has, in another jurisdiction, been judicially or administratively determined to be a dangerous, potentially dangerous, vicious, a nuisance, or a threat to the health or safety of human beings.
Before we begin the public hearing on this item, we did check to see if Humane Society had anyone available today to answer questions on this or shed any light as to their thinking. Oh, you made it. Great. Come on down. We'll allow you to do an introduction, and then we'll call for proponents and opponents.
Good afternoon. My name is Nancy Hintz. I'm the president and CEO of the Nebraska Humane Society, 8929 Fort Street.
And what are we trying to do
Oh,
here?
I'm sorry. So we are asking for a slight change in the ordinance, and what we'd like to do is include the word administratively. So there are two different ways animals can be determined potentially dangerous or dangerous, and that's either through a judicial process, so a court proceeding, or an administrative process, which is equivalent to the situation that we have here in Omaha, where the Humane Society has those hearings and then declares. And then those folks can go to the city to appeal. So we are seeing more animals coming in and being declared, these declarations through city and administrative processes. So we would like to include that. But the reason really for this kind of preempting today is we received some information from Animal Control in Minneapolis saying that a dog that had been declared dangerous in their city was moving to Omaha. Well, it was declared administratively and not judicially. So if the ordinance had been changed prior to that, then that would have prevented the dog from moving to Omaha. That
Thank
makes
you.
sense.
Thank you. Are there any proponents wishing to be heard on this item? Are there any opponents? Public hearing is closed.
Thank you.
Item 37, an ordinance to approve and accept the fiscal year 2019 Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistance Grant Program in the amount of $374,737 during the period of October 1, 2018 to September 30th, 2022.
The public hearing on item 37 begins at this time. Are there any proponents? Are there any opponents?
Larry Store, 5015 Lafayette Avenue, Omaha, Nebraska, 68132. I'm basically opposed because I don't think the public knows enough about this. There's all kinds of programs that are somewhere along the line costing us some kind of tax dollars, maybe not for the initial grant, and I don't know where the grant comes from, but once that grant is started, they tend to want to keep the programs going. So what happens to my billfold after the initial period of the grant? That's what we'd like to know. I'd also like to just quickly comment that today is Constitution Day. And taxation without representation was one of the reasons for forming our new Constitution, I believe. Thank you.
Are there any other opponents? Public hearing is closed.
Item 38, an ordinance authorizing the issuance of a purchase order to Todco Barricade for barricading services to be provided at various locations throughout the city.
The public hearing on item 38 begins at this time. Are there any proponents? Are there any opponents? Public hearing is closed.
One public hearing will be held for items 39 and 40, ordinances to approve an agreement with Energy Center Omaha LLC to supply steamed and chilled water and related services for 10 years to the W. Dale Clark Library and Central Police Facility.
The public hearing on items 39 and 40 begin at this time. Are there any proponents? Are there any opponents? Public hearing is closed.
Item 41, an ordinance to amend Section 32-211 of the Omaha Municipal Code pertaining to watershed management fees.
The public hearing on item 41 begins at this time. Are there any proponents? Are there any opponents? Public hearing is closed.
Item 42, an ordinance to amend ordinance number 41232 to acquire private property for the purpose of constructing the Missouri River Omaha Flood Protection Relief Wells Project.
The public hearing on item 42 begins at this time. Mr. Key, did you have anything to add on this one? Public Works? No? Are there any other proponents, opponents? Public hearing is closed.
Item 43, an ordinance approving a redevelopment and tax increment financing redevelopment agreement with PEKEDO LLC to implement the Elkhorn Station Tax Increment Financing Redevelopment Project Plan located at 2606 North Main Street, 2605 North 206th Street, and 20585 and 20575 Elkhorn Drive in an amount up to $3,200,000.
The public hearing on item 43 begins at this time. Are there any proponents?
Yes, good afternoon. Don Seaton, Omaha City Planning. This is the detailed TIF agreement for the mixed-use residential commercial project you recently approved in along Main Street, Elkhorn. Pretty straightforward agreement, and I'm available if you have any questions.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents?
Members of the City Council, my name is Jim Lang. I'm an attorney at 8526 F Street. I represent the applicant, Peekadoo LLC. The principal in Peekadoo is Don Gardner. This is like the third phase of this redevelopment area that Don's been involved in. I want to thank Councilman Harding for assisting us on this project from the beginning to where we're at now. He's been a great help and really appreciate it, Brinker. Any questions? I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents?
Good afternoon. My name is Juan Alvarado, 3060 Titus Avenue, Omaha, Nebraska 68107. I'm here to be in favor of this tax increment financing, but yet I always have to ask, be responsible on what we do with our money. We need to put provisions on this because there's a lot of labor exploitation in these particular projects. Mr. Pete Festerson indicated that in the Benson area, we've taken advantage of a lot of these developments. Part of my job is to circulate all these projects that we approve on. And right now, I just found 2 of them that I'm going to help them seek legal assistance because they did not get paid. We need to be responsible. We pay our own taxes, our workman's comp, liability insurance, federal and state income tax. They should too. I'm not going to tell him if he doesn't ask for TIF money, I'm not going to tell him how to do his business. But he's asking for our assistance. And with that, I'm only asking to put provisions in it. Hey, who are you going to use? Legitimate contractors, yes or no? Mr. Chris Germ said it. The definition of insanity. We keep doing this over and over and over, and it's not changing. We need to take action. I look at you as leadership. Please show us that leadership by looking into this. I'm not disrespecting you, but I'm telling you,
Address your comments to the council.
we cannot keep awarding this type of money. So with that, I'll continue to visit these job sites, and I will prove it. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents? Are there any opponents? Public hearing is closed. I would note, Mr. Alvarado, that we have requested from city law in the past whether we have the authority to add those sorts of conditions to TIF awards. And we're told, and Mr. Kratz, you can confirm, that under the community redevelopment laws, he guides us. We don't have that authority at this time. Is that correct, Mr. Kratz?
Paul Kratz, City Attorney, that is correct, although we certainly understand the situation and are sympathetic toward it. We just don't have the ability under the state law to do it at this point.
Thank you. Mr. Gray.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just very briefly, I understand your problem. We've addressed it in a couple of instances, especially when I was on the Building Commission. Councilmember Melton and I addressed that. We do know that it's an issue. I am working with union folks and others to try and work on, what hopefully will be a solution other than to just have you and others go around and continue to check and then report back to us. I'm hoping that there's something that we could do, but I think what we're going to have to do is going to have to start at the state level first.
Right.
From all the indications that I'm getting right now, it appears that we're going to have to make some changes at the state level first. So we are looking at it. We just need to get some more information and determine what's the best course of action. But it is not that we're not doing anything. Just wanted you to know that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
You're welcome. Any otherwise? No, next item.
Item 44, an ordinance approving a redevelopment and tax increment financing redevelopment agreement with 1402 Howard LLC to implement the 14 Howard tax increment financing redevelopment project plan located at 1402 and 1410 Howard Street in an amount up to $475,000.
The public hearing on item 44 begins at this time. Are there any proponents?
Yes, good afternoon. Don Seaton, Omaha City Planning. It's another TIF agreement with the financial details for the project at 14th and Howard that you reviewed a couple weeks ago. We asked for approval, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents?
Good afternoon, Eric Weisler, 9217 Davenport Street. I'm the developer for the project, here to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents? Are there any opponents? Public hearing is closed.
Item 45, an ordinance approving a second amendment to the redevelopment agreement with Alchemy Development LLC for the Zone 6 apartments at Exarban Village tax increment financing redevelopment agreement to increase the TIF loan proceeds from $1,625,568 to $2,110,300.
The public hearing on item 45 begins at this time. Are there any proponents?
Yes, good afternoon. Don Seaton, Omaha City Planning, and this ordinance is for the TIF agreement, actually a second amendment to the TIF agreement for the Exarban Zone 6 apartment projects in the Exarban Village development.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents?
Good afternoon, Barb Terry, representing Alchemy Development. Here to answer any questions. 1925 South 64th Avenue.
Standing in for Bert today?
Yeah, standing in for Bird today.
All right. Are there any other proponents? Are there any opponents? Public hearing is closed.
Item 46, an ordinance to approve the fiscal year 2019-2020 Douglas County Board of Commissioners Visitor Improvement Fund grant in the amount of $110,000 during the project period of July 1, 2019 to June 30th, 2020 to develop a new attraction along the riverfront at the Bob Carey pedestrian bridge.
The public hearing on item 46 begins at this time. Are there any proponents? Are there any opponents? This is the Omar project, right, Mr. Bench?
Brooke Bench, Parks and Recreation. Yes, it is.
Thank you. Public hearing is closed. Next item.
Item 47, an ordinance approving an amendment to an agreement with Millwork District 1 LLC to complete the installation of Indiana Street between 11th and 13th Streets and increase the city's expense allocation for the project to an amount not to exceed $1,100,000.
The public hearing on item 47 begins at this time. Are there any proponents? Are there any opponents? Public hearing is closed.
Item 48, an ordinance to amend Omaha Municipal Code, Chapter 19, Article 16, entitled Restaurant and Drinking Places Occupational Privilege Tax.
The public hearing on item 48 begins at this time. Are there any proponents? Are there any opponents? Public hearing is closed. Councilmember Harding.
President, just had a quick question for Law. What was the basis for the original language being included that limited the suspension or revocation of the license due to the delinquency in pavement?
Paul Kratz, City Attorney. That goes back quite a ways. I don't remember specifically the reasons. I think there are some concerns whether or not we could use this occupation tax as a penalty or hammer on for liquor license or for other type of licenses. I think as we've gone through the years of this, we've realized that that was not a concern, that we feel comfortable removing the language so that we now can have a better ability to collect the occupation tax.
Okay, I appreciate that clarification. And then maybe for next week, may have some consideration to put time limits or number of days of delinquency rather than just stating delinquency. We'll
Good idea.
put maybe 30, 60, 90 days or something
Good
like
idea.
that on there.
And I would add anecdotally at the time, there were political considerations too. As I, not speaking for the then council, but for myself at the time, I think there was an expression of concern that the city didn't want restaurateurs to think that they were being targeted. And that was as much of it as anything. Next item.
Item 49, an ordinance to amend Omaha Municipal Code, Chapter 34, Article 6, Division 3, entitled Removal of Obstructions and Accumulations by requiring the Public Works Department to annually establish the fee for department personnel to clear ice and snow accumulations.
The public hearing on item 49 begins at this time. Are there any proponents? Are there any opponents? Now, here I thought, Councilmember Melton, we were going to have a lot of the people who came to the Board of Ec here today. Okay. Public hearing is closed. No lights. Next item.
Non-action items, items 50 through 69, do not require public hearing or city council consideration at this meeting, but will be placed on a future agenda for public hearing and/or vote. The reason for non-action is noted after the item on the agenda, as well as the date the item is expected to appear on the agenda for consideration.
Is there a second? Roll call.
Palermo. Yes. Festerson. Yes. Gray. Yes. Harding. Melton. Yes. Mr. President.
Yes.
Motion passed 6-0. Meeting is adjourned at 3:36.